Bullies mock the new kid. Huge mistake. They didn't know he's a secret fighting champion. The new kid was always an easy target. That was the unspoken rule at Westlake High School, where the social hierarchy had been firmly established years. When Ethan Chen arrived mid-semester, he might as well have been wearing a sign that said fresh meat. At 15, Ethan was neither tall nor particularly impressive to look at. His slight frame, perpetually hunched shoulders, and tendency to avoid eye contact made him virtually invisible, except to those who actively sought out vulnerability. He kept his dark hair slightly longer than most boys, partially hiding behind it when conversations became uncomfortable. The oversized hoodies he wore seemed to swallow his narrow shoulders, giving him the appearance of someone trying to disappear into his own clothing. On his first day, he navigated the crowded hallways with his schedule clutched tightly in one hand, eyes darting nervously between classroom numbers and the paper in his grip. Westlake was his third school in 2 years. His father's military career kept their family in constant motion. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach as he squeezed past groups of students who barely registered his existence. "Watch it, new kid," a voice barked, as Ethan accidentally bumped into someone while turning a corner. He looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered boy with close-cropped blonde hair glaring down at him. The boy's Letterman jacket declared his status more effectively than any crown could have. "Sorry," Ethan mumbled, stepping back quickly. "I didn't see you." "Yeah, that's obvious." The boy's eyes narrowed as he sized Ethan up, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "I'm Brett. You might want to remember that name." 2 other boys flanked Brett like loyal soldiers, one with red hair, and freckles, the other dark-haired and wearing the same Letterman jacket. The redhead snickered, nudging his friend. "Look at him, Marcus, shaking in his boots already." Ethan wasn't shaking, not visibly at least, but his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd played this scene out too many times before. The characters changed, but the script remained depressingly familiar. "I'm just trying to find room 203, Ethan said, attempting to sidestep the trio. Brett's arm shot out, blocking his path. "You know, there's a new student fee at Westlake. Didn't anyone tell you?" The hallway had grown quieter as nearby students sensed the unfolding drama. Some drifted closer, hungry for entertainment, while others hurried past, eyes averted. Not a single person intervened. "I don't think that's a real thing," Ethan said quietly, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor. Brett's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You calling me a liar?" He stepped closer, invading Ethan's space. $20. Consider it an investment in your social security." Ethan knew the right move was to hand over whatever cash he had, to prevent this from escalating. But something inside him, the same something that had endured this treatment at 2 previous schools, had calcified into stubborn resistance. "I don't have any money on me," he lied, acutely aware of the $20 bill his mother had given him for lunch that week. "No, let's check, shall we?" Brett's hand reached toward Ethan's pocket, but froze mid-air as a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Lawrence!" A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and rectangular glasses approached, expression stern. "Don't you have somewhere to be? The bell rang 2 minutes ago." Brett's hand dropped to his side, his face instantly rearranging into a mask of respectful attention. "Just welcoming the new student, Ms. Harmon, showing him around." Ms. Harmon's skeptical gaze shifted between the boys. "How considerate. Now all of you get to class." As the group dispersed, she turned to Ethan. "Room 203 is upstairs. First door on the right. Don't be late on your first day." With that, she walked away, leaving Ethan momentarily relieved, but deeply aware that he just made his first enemy at Westlake High. As he climbed the stairs to his classroom, he felt the weight of countless eyes following him, assessing his weakness, marking him as prey. What none of them could possibly know was that beneath Ethan's unassuming exterior lay a secret that would have changed everything. For 6 years, Ethan had trained religiously in Brazilian jiu-jitsu under the tutelage of his grandfather, a former champion who had competed internationally before opening his own dojo. Before every move, Ethan's body had been conditioned to automatically assess opponents, identify vulnerabilities, and calculate the most efficient path to victory. But more importantly, his grandfather had instilled in him a code. True strength meant showing restraint. "Fighting is always the last resort," he would say during their countless training sessions. "The moment you use your skills to intimidate or harm unnecessarily, you've already lost." Ethan had promised his grandfather that he would honor this code. So far, at each new school, he had managed to either avoid confrontation entirely or diffuse situations before they escalated to physical violence. but something told him that Westlake might test that resolve in ways he hadn't experienced before. By lunchtime, word had spread about the new kid who'd disrespected Brett Lawrence, captain of the wrestling team and unofficial ruler of Westlake's social kingdom. As Ethan entered the cafeteria with his bagged lunch, the subtle shift in attention was unmistakable. Conversations paused momentarily as heads turned in his direction. He found an empty table in the corner and sat with his back to the wall, a habit born from experience. As he unwrapped his sandwich, he scanned the room, mentally mapping potential exit routes and identifying possible allies or threats. His grandfather would have approved of his situational awareness. This seat taken? A girl with curly brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses stood across from him, lunch tray in hand. Without waiting for an answer, she slid into the seat opposite him. "I'm Zoe." Ethan nodded cautiously. "Ethan, I know. Everyone knows. You're the new kid who stood up to Brett Lawrence." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Jury's still out on which." "I didn't stand up to anyone," Ethan clarified, uncomfortable with the characterization. "I just didn't have money to give him." Zoe snorted. "That's standing up to Brett in this ecosystem. Most people just pay the tax and move on. Does he do that to everyone? New kids, mostly, or anyone who looks like they won't fight back?" She studied him with curious eyes. "You don't look like the fighting type." If only she knew. Ethan took a bite of his sandwich to avoid responding. "Directly. What about teachers? They just let it happen." Zoe shrugged. "They intervene when they see it, but Brett's smart. He doesn't do anything too obvious in front of authority figures. His dad's also on the school board, so—" She trailed off meaningfully. "Anyway, consider yourself warned. Brett doesn't like being embarrassed, and Ms. Harmon catching him in. So the act definitely counts as embarrassment." As if summoned by their conversation, Brett appeared at their table, flanked by Marcus and the redhead whose name Ethan still didn't know. "Making friends already, new kid?" Brett's tone was light, but his eyes were cold. "Hey, Zoe, slumming it today?" Zoe rolled her eyes. "Go away, Brett. Don't you have some freshmen to terrorize?" Brett ignored her, focusing on Ethan. "We got interrupted earlier. I think we were discussing your contribution to the Westlake Social Fund." Ethan remained silent, continuing to eat his sandwich as if Brett weren't looming over him. His heart rate had increased slightly, but years of training had taught him to control his breathing, to maintain composure even as adrenaline began to flow. "I'm talking to you," Brett said, voice hardening as he placed both palms on the table and leaned down to Ethan's eye level. Ethan finally looked up, making deliberate eye contact. "I heard you. I still don't have any money to give you." The cafeteria had grown quieter as nearby tables tuned into the confrontation. Brett was now in a position where backing down would cost him face. Ethan recognized the dangerous calculus happening behind the other boy's eyes. "Stand up," Brett ordered, straightening to his full height. "Brett," Zoe warned, "there are teachers watching." A quick glance confirmed this was true. A couple of faculty members were indeed present at the periphery of the cafeteria, though they hadn't yet noticed the situation developing. Brett seemed to reconsider his approach. With a sudden motion, he knocked Ethan's lunch to the floor, sending the remains of his sandwich and an apple scattering. "Oops, clumsy me," the redhead laughed. "Better clean that up, new kid." Ethan remained seated, his expression neutral despite the flush of anger, warming his neck. "You should probably leave now." Something in his tone, the quiet confidence perhaps, seemed to catch Brett off guard. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face before being replaced by renewed anger. "This isn't over," he muttered, before turning to leave, his friends trailing behind him like obedient shadows. Zoe let out a low whistle once they were out of earshot. "Well, that was interesting. You've got a death wish, but it's interesting." Ethan bent to pick up his ruined lunch, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I'm used to it," he said simply. "Used to what? People like Brett? People who mistake kindness for weakness." He discarded the remnants of his sandwich in a nearby trash can. "It happens everywhere." Zoe studied him with newfound curiosity. "There's something different about you, isn't there? Most new kids are either crying or transferring out by now." Ethan offered a small, enigmatic smile. "I just try to avoid unnecessary conflicts." "Well, you're doing a spectacular job so far," Zoe said with sarcastic cheer. "Here, have half my sandwich. I owe you for the entertainment." For the rest of the day, Ethan was hyper-aware of Brett and his friends. They appeared at the edges of his vision between classes, watching but not approaching. The message was clear. They were biding their time. By the final bell, Ethan's shoulders ached from the tension of constant vigilance. As students flooded into the hallways, eager to escape the confines of education, Ethan deliberately took his time at his locker. Better to let the crowds thin and avoid potential confrontations in the chaos. He texted his mother that he might be late, claiming a meeting with a teacher to discuss catching up on coursework. Once the hallways had emptied considerably, he shouldered his backpack and headed for the nearest exit. He'd almost reached the double doors leading to freedom when a familiar voice stopped him. "There he is, told you he'd try to sneak out the side." Ethan turned to find Brett, Marcus, and the redhead approaching from the adjacent hallway. No teachers in sight. No witnesses except for a couple of students too far away to matter. "I'm not sneaking anywhere," Ethan said, adjusting his grip on his backpack strap. "I'm going home." Brett moved closer, invading Ethan's personal space. "Not until we finish our conversation from this morning. I think you owe me something." "I don't owe you anything," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the warning bells going off in his head. Brett's smile was all teeth, no humor. "See, that's where you're wrong. You owe me respect, and since you don't seem to understand how things work around here, we're going to have to teach you." The redhead moved to Ethan's right while Marcus positioned himself behind, cutting off potential escape routes. Ethan recognized the tactical positioning. They'd done this before. 3 against 1, Ethan observed quietly. "Seems fair." Brett's laugh was sharp. "Life isn't fair, new kid. Thought you would have learned that by now." In that moment, time seemed to slow for Ethan. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "There is a difference between starting a fight and defending yourself. Honor demands you avoid the former but permits the latter." This was clearly self-defense. Still, Ethan made one last attempt at de-escalation. "You don't want to do this," he said, making direct eye contact with Brett. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning. "Oh, but I really do," Brett said, and threw a punch aimed directly at Ethan's face. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for everyone involved. Ethan's body moved on pure instinct, years of training taking over. He shifted, slightly to the right, allowing Brett's fist to pass harmlessly by his cheek. In the same fluid motion, he grabbed Brett's extended arm, stepped in close, and used his attacker's momentum to throw him off balance. Before Brett could register what was happening, he found himself flipped over Ethan's hip, landing hard on his back with a painful thud that echoed through the empty hallway. The air rushed from his lungs in a surprised whoosh. Marcus and the redhead froze in shocked disbelief. "What the—" Marcus started, but never finished his thought as he decided to rush Ethan from behind. Without even turning fully around, Ethan sensed the approach, sidestepped at the last moment and stuck out his foot. Marcus, unable to stop his forward momentum, tripped and sprawled face-first onto the linoleum floor. The redhead, witnessing his friend's quick defeats, hesitated visibly. "You don't have to do this," Ethan told him calmly. "Walk away." Instead, the boy pulled something from his pocket, a small pocket knife, and flicked it open. "Don't move," he warned, his voice shaking slightly. Ethan's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed to grow calmer, more focused. "Put that away before someone gets hurt." "Shut up!" the redhead yelled, lunging forward with the knife extended. Ethan moved with precision that came from countless hours of practice. He deflected, the knife hand outward and away from his body, stepped in close and delivered a sharp elbow strike to the redhead's solar plexus. As the boy doubled over, gasping for breath, Ethan twisted the knife from his grasp and tossed it aside, where it skittered across the floor well out of reach. Brett had managed to get back to his feet by this point, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "You're dead, you hear me? Dead!" He charged like a bull, all technique abandoned in favor of blind fury. Ethan waited until the last possible moment before dropping to one knee and using Brett's momentum once again, this time to flip him over his shoulder. Brett landed even harder than before, the back of his head bouncing slightly against the floor. Ethan immediately moved into a controlling position, applying just enough pressure to Brett's arm to cause discomfort without injury. "Stay down," he advised quietly. "It's over." "What is going on here?" The sharp voice of Principal Donovan cut through the tableau like a knife. He stood at the end of the hallway, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. Brett pinned. Beneath Ethan, Marcus slowly picking himself up from the floor, and the redhead still gasping for breath, the pocket knife visible several feet away. "My office. All of you. Now." In the principal's office, the story emerged in fragments, Brett and his friends claiming they'd been viciously attacked by the new student, while Ethan calmly explained that he had defended himself after being cornered and threatened, pointing out the knife as evidence. Principal Donovan listened to all sides before dismissing Brett and his friends temporarily so he could speak to Ethan alone. Mr. Chen, he began once the door closed, fighting is strictly against school policy, regardless of who started it. I understand, sir, Ethan replied respectfully. That said, Donovan continued, the presence of a weapon changes things considerably. He studied Ethan with newfound interest. Those were some impressive moves. Where did you learn to fight? Like that. My grandfather teaches Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Ethan explained. I've been training since I was 9. And yet, according to your file, you've never been in trouble for fighting at your previous schools. No, sir. My grandfather taught me that fighting is always the last resort. Principal Donovan nodded, slowly. I see. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Mr. Lawrence and his friends have had numerous incidents with other students. Nothing this serious before, but enough to establish a pattern. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. Here's what's going to happen. Due to the zero-tolerance policy on fighting, you'll receive detention for the rest of the week. However, given the circumstances and the weapon involved, Mr. Lawrence and his friends will face suspension, possibly expulsion in the case of Mr. Henley for bringing a knife to school. Ethan nodded, accepting the punishment without complaint. One more thing, Donovan added. We have a martial arts club that meets after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They could use someone with your skills. Consider it once your detention is served. The news spread through Westlake High like wildfire. By the next morning, the story had grown to mythic proportions. The quiet new kid who had single-handedly defeated 3 of the school's most feared bullies. Some versions claimed Ethan was a black belt in 5 different martial arts. Others swore he was actually an undercover student from a military academy. When Ethan entered the school, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Students who had previously looked through him now watched with undisguised curiosity. Some nodded in acknowledgement, others quickly moved out of his path. At his locker, he found Zoe waiting with an impressed grin. You held out on me, Chen. Avoid unnecessary conflicts. Huh? Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. It was necessary. Apparently, she agreed. Brett's got a concussion. Marcus broke his nose when he fell, and Tyler, that's Red by the way, has been expelled for the knife. She leaned closer. You're like a celebrity now, the hero who took down Westlake's biggest tyrants. I'm not a hero, Ethan said firmly, gathering his books. I just defended myself. Well, your self-defense has changed things around here. Kids who were afraid to look Brett in the eye are suddenly walking taller. She fell into step beside him as he headed to first period. You should sit with us at lunch. My friends are dying to meet you. The rest of the day passed in a blur of curious stares and whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when Ethan came within earshot. During his classes, he tried to focus on the material rather than the newfound attention, but it was difficult to ignore the fundamental shift in how people perceived him. In the cafeteria, he reluctantly joined Zoe and her friends, a diverse group of students who bombarded him with questions about the fight and his training. Is it true you flipped Brett over your head? One boy asked eagerly. No, Ethan corrected. I used his momentum against him. That's the basic principle of jiu-jitsu, using your opponent's force rather than opposing it directly. Could you teach me that? Another student asked. Before Ethan could answer, a hush fell over their table. Brett Lawrence stood nearby, his expression unreadable, a small bandage visible at the back of his head. The bruising around his left eye had darkened overnight to a spectacular purple. Everyone tensed, preparing for confrontation, but Brett simply looked at Ethan for a long moment before nodding once, a gesture that might have been respect, and continuing to a table on the far side of the cafeteria with a small group of friends that notably did not include Marcus or Tyler. Did that just happen? Zoe whispered after he passed. Brett Lawrence backing down? He's not backing down, Ethan said quietly. He's reassessing. Whatever it is, it's historic, one of Zoe's friends declared. No one stands up to Brett and lives to tell about it. I didn't stand up to him, Ethan corrected. I defended myself. There's a difference. But the distinction seemed lost on his new admirers, who continued to pepper him with questions about martial arts and the fight details. Throughout it, all Ethan maintained his humility, redirecting conversations whenever possible, uncomfortable with being viewed as some kind of conquering hero. After school, he reported dutifully to detention, where he found himself alone with Miss Harmon, the teacher who had interrupted that first confrontation in the hallway. Mr. Chen, she acknowledged, gesturing for him to take a seat. I hear you've had quite the impactful first days at Westlake. Ethan slid into a desk near the front. Not my intention, ma'am. No? She regarded him thoughtfully. Sometimes the quietest students make the loudest statements. She pushed a worksheet toward him. You can work on this during your detention. It's additional credit for science. As Ethan began the assignment, Miss Harmon spoke again. You know, when I intervened that first morning, I was concerned for you. New students who cross Brett Lawrence tend to have difficult adjustments. Ethan looked up from the worksheet. I appreciate your concern. What I find interesting, she continued, is that you didn't seem afraid of him even then. Most students would have been terrified. I've dealt with bullies before, Ethan said simply. Ms. Harmon nodded. Well, your handling of the situation, while not condoned officially by the school, may have positive repercussions beyond what you realize. Several students who have been targeted by Brett in the past have suddenly found their voices. The week of detention passed quickly, and Ethan found his place at Westlake gradually shifting. He was no longer invisible, but neither was he treated as the violent avenger some had initially made him out to be. Instead, a kind of quiet respect had formed around him. Students acknowledged him in the hallways, teachers noticed his diligent academic work, and even Coach Reynolds approached him about joining the wrestling team. With your skills, you could be a state champion, Reynolds insisted after watching Ethan demonstrate a few throws during the martial arts club meeting that Principal Donovan had recommended. I'll think about it, Ethan promised, though competition had never been his goal in training. The most surprising development came 2 weeks after the incident, when Brett Lawrence approached him in the parking lot after school. Ethan tensed automatically, but Brett held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Relax, he said. I'm not here to start round 2. Ethan waited silently, evaluating Brett's body language for signs of deception. The other boy seemed genuinely non-threatening, though discomfort was evident in his rigid posture. Look, Brett continued when Ethan didn't respond. What happened? I was out of line. The whole new student fee thing, it's just something we've always done. No one ever really fought back before. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Is this an apology? Brett shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, I guess it is. My dad was pretty pissed about the suspension. Made me realize some things about how I've been acting. He extended his hand. No hard feelings. Ethan hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. No hard feelings. As Brett turned to leave, he paused. You're really good, you know. Those moves. Have you ever considered competing? Not really my thing, Ethan replied. My grandfather always taught me that true mastery isn't about defeating others, it's about overcoming yourself. Brett considered this, nodding slowly. Maybe you could show me some of those techniques sometime. For the wrestling team, he added quickly. Could give us an edge in regionals. Maybe, Ethan agreed, surprised by the request, but willing to consider it. As Brett walked away, Zoe appeared at Ethan's side, having witnessed the exchange from a distance. Well, that's something I never thought I'd see. Brett Lawrence apologizing to anyone. People can surprise you, Ethan said, watching Brett's retreating figure. Everyone has the capacity to change. Some philosophical wisdom from the martial arts master, Zoe teased. Ethan smiled, more relaxed than he'd been since arriving at Westlake. Just something my grandfather would say. In the weeks that followed, the dynamics at Westlake High continued to evolve. Brett returned from his suspension, a somewhat humbled version of his former self. While not exactly friendly with Ethan, he maintained a respectful distance and, surprisingly, began to use his considerable social influence to discourage the kind of bullying that had once been his trademark. Marcus, similarly chastened by the experience, followed Brett's lead. Tyler did not return to school, his expulsion having been made permanent after a review by the school board. Even his father's influence couldn't overcome the seriousness of bringing a weapon to school. For Ethan, the transition from invisible new kid to reluctant school celebrity gradually settled into something more comfortable, a quiet respect that allowed him to form genuine friendships while staying true to himself. He joined the martial arts club, sharing his knowledge with others while emphasizing his grandfather's philosophy of discipline, respect, and restraint. The strongest person in the room, he often repeated to eager students learning their first techniques, is the one who never needs to prove it. One afternoon, as Ethan was demonstrating a simple throw to a group of beginners, he noticed his grandfather watching from the doorway of the gym, a proud smile illuminating his weathered face. After the practice ended, the old man approached, embracing his grandson warmly. "Your mother told me about what happened," he said in his accented English. "At first I worried you had forgotten our discussions about when to use your skills." "I remembered, grandfather," Ethan assured him. "It was self-defense, nothing more." The old man nodded, surveying the students gathering their belongings, the respectful nods they gave Ethan as they departed. "And now you teach others." "I try to pass on what you've taught me, Not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. His grandfather squeezed his shoulder approvingly. This is the true victory, Ethan. Not defeating those boys, but transforming their hostility into respect. This is the highest form of martial art, changing not just how others see you, but how they see themselves. As they walked out together, Ethan realized that his grandfather was right. The real change at Westlake wasn't that he had stood up to bullies, it was that in doing so, he had created space for others to stand up as well. The culture that had allowed Brett and his friends to terrorize students was slowly being replaced by one of mutual respect. Zoe joined them in the parking lot, introducing herself enthusiastically to Ethan's grandfather before turning to Ethan. "There's a group studying for the history test at my house tonight. You should come." "I'd like that," Ethan said, smiling genuinely. As Zoe walked toward her car, his grandfather chuckled. "Perhaps there are many kinds of victories, eh?" Ethan felt his cheeks warm slightly. "She's just a friend, grandfather." "For now," the old man said with a knowing smile. "For now." Watching Zoe drive away, Ethan reflected on how differently things had turned out than he'd expected on that first day at Westlake. He had arrived anticipating the same pattern he'd experienced at other schools, trying to remain invisible, enduring whatever harassment came his way, counting the days until the next inevitable move. Instead, he had found something unexpected, not just acceptance, but a place where he could be fully himself, where his quiet strength was recognized not as a weapon, but as a gift that could lift others. As he and his grandfather walked to the car, Ethan glanced back at the school building, no longer seeing it as a battleground, but as a place of possibility. For the first time in years, he wasn't counting the days until his family's next relocation. For the first time, he was looking forward to tomorrow. "Ready to go home?" his grandfather asked. Ethan nodded, a quiet contentment settling over him. "Yes, I think I am." Now, what's your opinion about this story? Leave a comment, as we'd love to read it. Also, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription means a lot to me and helps me a great deal, so please subscribe, so we can keep bringing you content like this. And it's not over yet. Another emotional story like this one is playing on your screen right now. Click on it. I'm waiting for you.